Man, the conversations have been so dope over the last few days, and man, I'm if nobody else is, I'm glad that I've put them on because they've just been really therapeutic, just to have communal conversation. Talk about all the things. So we're getting ready to have a conversation with Adrian Jones here in just a few minutes, licensed counselor. I think it's gonna be good. There we go.
There we go. We're making it happen, right? Or there's a will.
There's a way.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, bro. How are you?
I'm doing blessed. I'm doing blessed. Thank you for having me on today.
Oh man, it's my honor. My honor and
I,
my pleasure.
awesome. I've truly enjoyed it thus far. So the series has been great. So thank you. Keep it coming.
No, no problem. Thanks for chiming in. Uh-oh, you went sideways
Absolutely.
on me.
Uh-oh, yeah, no. It's very well needed, by the way. Everything you're doing is very well needed. So thank you. Seriously.
Man, praise God. I'm just happy to play my part. I think
Right?
a lot of us are
Yes.
feeling like, and you even mentioned it earlier, off camera, this it's really just kind of all hands on deck. Everybody using the gifts that they have to try to be a bomb because we that's what we need right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love the way you
Man.
put that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is just for those who are watching, who haven't been chiming in, this is a continuation, actually the last segment of a series that I decided to start called Who Am I Becoming? And it's really stemmed from a single that I released the same week actually that George Floyd was murdered. And I pose the question because I know that for us as a community, we are dealing with a lot of things at one time. And so I just wanted to create a space where we can vent, where we can process, where we can put names to some of the things that we're dealing with. And by God's grace, I was able to have a woman counselor come on last week and just really help out the ladies. We centered Black women last week. And then this week, we are centering Black men. And we got the wonderful, the great Mr. Adrian Jones that is going to assist us. So Adrian, introduce yourself to the people. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me, LaToria. It's a blessing to be here, and I did get to check out with Jula. If people did miss that, they have to go back and watch that because obviously the trauma that we experience as Black men in this country,
Mm-hmm.
it's immense. But it's also, I think, a lot of times our Black women are kind of left out of that at times. The
Yeah,
spotlight isn't as shown as
right.
much. But if we're honest about it, they face just as much, if not more, because they face it on different aspects that women face. So please, yeah, do yourself if you didn't get a chance to see it, go back and check it out. Plus, Jula, she has a special place in my heart for sure. So always. Well, once again, thank you for having me on here. My name is Adrian Jones. I am a LPC intern. It's kind of what we spoke about a little bit earlier about what mental health looks like and how the internship looks as far as once you graduate and once you pass your test and once you're a licensed counselor here in the state of Texas, you still have an additional 3,000 plus hours basically to get until you drop that intern label. So I think right now I'm a little bit over like 2,000 plus hours. So that's 2,000 plus sessions that you've had, and so I'm thankful to have it. But at the same time, my role here, I primarily work with teens and up, pretty
Okay.
much everything from a lot of married men, divorced, as well as couples.
Okay.
So couple counseling as well. So I love it. It's been a blessing for me more than anything to get to use those gifts that God has given you. I love the way you touched in on that, right? We're all given gifts and
Mm-hmm.
how that we go about those and how we utilize those in the way that God's given them. And so for me, as a Black man, it's important for me to reach out and help out and kind of crush some of those stereotypes that go along with mental health and really mental health within the Black community as well. So that's
Sure.
why I jumped at the chance to be here today. Absolutely.
Man, that's so awesome. So, um, does this count towards your hours?
You know what? That's a really good question. That's a really good question. Somebody's probably here learning right now. I'll have to get
Listen,
some hours from somebody at this point.
hey man, we got to find a way to finagle that, bro, and go ahead and get you
Right?
these hours real quick. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I love where your mind's at. I love where your mind's
You got to
at.
consolidate, family. Yeah, man.
Absolutely.
So what I want to do is just really, for the viewers that are here, just to kind of listen in. And I've really just been listening and for the last week, really trying to hone in and pay attention to some of the ways in which, our men are expressing themselves, and really just thinking about what questions could I turn those into so that they can
Mhm.
start to see the benefit of mental health and the
Right.
necessity for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
the conversation I had with some of my bros last night, I feel like it was phenomenal because it offered kind of a front row seat to just see a lot of what Black men are dealing with emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and how that plays out um, in life, just in general. And so that's what we'll do. We'll just jump into. I'll ask you a few questions, and you give us your insight and your wisdom and your knowledge, and we'll go from
Perfect.
there.
That sounds great.
Sweet. Okay, so first and foremost, I know, just kind of tailing off of the conversation that we had with Zula last week, um, but I'll give you an opportunity to give your definition of trauma, and then
Mhm.
to go a layer deeper and talk about uh, racial trauma, or specifically Black trauma, and
Absolutely.
what
Absolutely.
that's like, as a Black man.
Right, absolutely, and I love the way that you because there is a distinction between the two, and it's important to mention that what trauma looks like for most people, and as therapists, we like to use the words big T trauma and little T trauma,
Okay.
and what that refers to is the big traumas that we go through in life, and I think most people can kind of they can register that, right? Like if
Mm-hmm.
I've been to war, right? I've been assaulted. When we hear things like that, we think of those as big T traumas.
Mm-hmm.
When we move to kind of a smaller form of trauma, and I almost disparage, I don't like using that because trauma is trauma, but there are some that are very big. But within the mental health community, we
Mm-hmm.
recognize small chi trauma as a little bit more of a trauma that's generally transmitted. It can be things as far as harassment, right? Someone saying something negative, bullying, things like that. Well, in the mental health community, they refer to those as small t trauma. Like that's a small
Mm.
trauma for a lot of people. The reason why I want to make that distinction is because when you're Black, and those things are specifically geared towards, so the harassment that you're going to face,
Mm-hmm.
some of the bullying that you're going to face, when that's specific to the color of your skin, that looks like a lot different trauma than a small t trauma for many people, especially depending on the severity of it, of what happened to you and when it happened. So for a
Mm.
lot of Black men, myself included,
Mm-hmm.
you send some of those traumas based off of the color of your skin from when you're a child.
Yeah.
So you've been growing up with some of those traumas for your entire life. The problem with it, and the reason why I say that is, as the mental health community has been a bit slow, just like as we've been as a society of whole, as we've come around Black people and mental health. Because if I say, quite frankly, having racial undertones being thrown at me,
Mm-hmm.
that is a big trauma for many
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's part of it is understanding and educating yourself in that way that the traumas that the Black community face, quite frankly, are very unique to us. And most cultures and most people in America aren't ever going to face those things. So at times it can be very difficult for them to understand the trauma that we go through. Or also another big thing to kind of recognize are microaggressions and
Ah,
what those look like as well. So and even though it's called a microaggression, when someone's saying something about you or a microaggression, for instance, and let me give an example of that. And this is an example many Black people hear is, "Oh, you speak so well," right? Like that is an example of a microaggression, almost saying, based off of the color of your skin, I didn't expect you to articulate any kind of word,
right.
right? Like, so, which is quote unquote, is something once again that Black people deal with in this country and probably in many countries that
Mm-hmm.
other races just don't have any kind of idea about. I'm going to extrapolate that out just a little bit,
Go for it.
because let's say we're in a business setting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're in an executive meeting, and someone says something like that to you. Well, some people in that meeting might take that as a compliment. Well, no, that was a microaggression, and that was a rude thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a black person, if you're given a choice in that moment, do I confront this? Do I choose this? Is this a learning moment for this group? Because, quite frankly, for a lot of black people, they choose not to push into that moment.
Yeah.
Why? It could cost you your job,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, so those are some of the things that black people deal with that other groups just do not deal with. And quite frankly, unfortunately, the mental health community, as well as the society as a whole that we live in, don't always address those things, or sometimes even worse. Of what we're seeing right now, people say, "Oh no, that's not really happening. That's
The
not really what's
gaslighting,
going
right?
on."
Like, it's not
Right?
that bad.
Absolutely. So those are some of the things that black people deal with that just other cultures don't understand and don't
Yeah.
deal with on a day-to-day basis, and even more so, don't deal with it even as children. So think
Mm,
about that. The tools that you have as a child are very small,
yeah.
right? So the ability to understand some of the racism that you're dealing with, some of the trauma that you're dealing with, we've
Mm-hmm.
seen that play itself out where, and I know Jula touched in on this as well, the trauma that you face as a child,
Mm,
it plays itself out all the way through adulthood if it's never addressed and if it's never taken care of.
mm-hmm.
So those are some of the real things that we're seeing play out on the mental health side as a black man, seeing that of if we don't deal with some of those traumas, then they play themselves out in some really powerful and unfortunate ways, unhealthy ways, as we grow into adulthood.
Oh my gosh. That, just that, what you just said, alone is so real. And I think, being a woman, for us, we see that in situations like dating, for
Hmm.
example, like when trauma is normal, or they don't have the tools as little boys and they grow up to be grown men with those same things that they've never dealt with, and then you try to engage in a relationship, you know what I mean? But
Absolutely.
this is why your work is important, because regardless of the stage of life, real talk, you might be able to
Absolutely.
point them straight back to when they were an 8-year-old little boy. And it's just like
Yeah.
that same thing has been following you all of your life, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely, and for some people even earlier,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
think the first time I had someone call me a racial slur, I was earlier than 8 years old. I always remember
Wow.
that. I still remember where I was at, what was going on, everything, right? And that was an adult who called
Man.
me that, right? So,
Wow.
and if you think about that, quote unquote, right? They would refer to that as a small T trauma. But is that true? Right? Do you see what I'm
No.
saying? So as far as that goes, once again, we face a whole different dynamic as black people here in this country, period, that other people just aren't going to face. Even from the aspect of how we got to this country, it looks different than any other culture has had to deal with.
Right.
So when you play that out, and even more so when you extrapolate it out from generation to generation of it never getting taken care of, well,
Hmm.
where are we left with? What are we left with at that point? And if you think about it, and let's play it all the way back and talk about trauma and how trauma deals and what PTSD is and what those things
Yes.
really look like
Because that's what I
when
was
you
just
can.
about to ask you. So go for that.
Absolutely. When we talk about PTSD, and there was actually a study that was just done, and this kind of touches in even more so
Yeah.
of how mental health has kind of been slow to kind of address the needs of black people in this country, is there are even publications up to 2005 that said black people are much less to deal with anxiety than any other race,
Wait, 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 wait,
which
wait,
we,
wait. Who's on
yeah.
who's on the board of
And that's the question, right? And that's the question. And this is pushing forward a little bit. So in 2010, the same study was done. And what they found out is that African Americans deal with PTSD much higher than any other race. So what we recognize is this. one, African Americans are much more likely to experience anxiety and PTSD than any other race. The reason being are for specifically these reasons, what we deal with culturally. So let's go here to PTSD. So what PTSD looks like in so many different ways. PTSD can cause flashbacks, hypervigilance, right? Which is the moment of this is full disclosure here. I'll kind of put myself out there.
Filter
So
free
what
zone, fam. Go for it.
Here we go. All right. So what hypervigilance looks like for me, Adrian Jones, is this. When I go to work, like I have back when we went to work, right? so when I drive to work, I have a very set route that I take. The reason why that route is set, I wake up, I take a specific route to drop my children off, and then I go to work. The reason why I take that route is because that's the route that has the least amount of police officers that I've ever encountered on that route.
Wow.
That's why I choose that route, because I don't want any kind of situation where I have to engage with police officers more than what's necessary.
Yeah.
Because of that. Well, I've spoken to, and that's something for me to continue to work through. But I don't think that I'm unique as a black man in that way, or a black person in that way.
Right.
I think that there are a lot of black people who face hypervigilance in that regard. What we've found is this: if you face that type of hypervigilance day in, day out for years on purpose, what does that do for you? What does that do for you anxiety-wise? What does that do for the people around you, right? So think about that. And then let's transfer it as well. As you and me, we can understand it, right? Like, we can go to that place of empathy with one another.
Sure.
But let's say I tried to explain that, or there were people out there that tried to explain that to a boss or a coworker who didn't understand that, and weren't able to rationalize that. Well, that could kind of turn, once again, in the professional setting, that can have ramifications on your job. That can have ramifications on your future progress, getting promoted, things of that nature. And even if we, once again, if we take it all the way back to childhood, think about the issues that young black boys face growing up in public school systems that other cultural groups do not face.
Yeah.
So, and even more so, let's keep going backwards. And I think that's a really important thing, is it's important to go back. I recognize, and I hear this quite often from people, when people say, hey, slavery's over. Like, you hear that quite a bit. Slavery is over. Y'all need to get over slavery. Okay. Let me, and I'll do this really quick because I know you got some questions to ask, and I'll just keep going.
No, you unpack that thing, sir. Tell them how you feel.
Absolutely. So, we also have to look at it in regards to the aspect that it's a systematic problem. So anytime you're dealing with systematic problems and racism within the black community, it's one of those things of you're dealing with it every day. And then the extreme trauma, and we can say, hey, it's been, we've dealt with racism in our country for over 400 years.
Right.
So if we do unpack that, let's unpack that and look all the way through it. Well, what are the adverse situations that people faced once they got here to this country? Slavery in itself is the biggest, think of a greater trauma that a person could deal with throughout slavery, especially the form of slavery that our ancestors dealt with here in America. That is a very unique form of slavery. And if we look at slavery, and there's still slavery that goes on in the world, right? There's sex slavery, there's labor slavery, there are all types of slavery, indentured servitude. If you think about it, our ancestors faced every single form of slavery. Of that slavery that I just mentioned, every single form they faced.
Wow.
So they faced that slavery for 250 plus years, right? That was the situation. So over 250 plus years, they faced that slavery. Well, then let's keep going, because it wasn't one of those moments where, and first, let me say happy Juneteenth to you. It's right around the corner, right?
Absolutely.
But let's not act like Juneteenth was this moment where everyone threw up their hands and they said, oh, you're not slaves anymore. Hey, we're equals. Let's go on about our lives. That is not what happened whatsoever. In fact, what happened were laws then started to become created to suppress black people even more
Yeah.
in those situations. We had Jim Crow. We've had so many different aspects. You've had COINTELPRO, where the FBI is attacking black people. Think about some of those things. You've seen our leaders get taken out. So think about watching that year in, year in, day out, generation after generation after generation, and for it to not get taken care of. And once again, it's one of those moments of saying, yes, as black people, we absolutely have some things that we can work on and we can do some things better as a community. But what I'm saying is, even if we recognize those things and we do those things, the society as a whole, we're still watching. We're still talking about George Floyd today in 2020.
Right.
So we're still seeing those traumas, and we're still seeing that non-congruence of, hey, yeah, y'all are equals, and we're treating you and we're putting you on the same place. But then we look out and that's not actually what's happening. So if you're dealing with that kind of trauma from generation to generation and it's never been exhausted, it's never been extinguished, and it's never been taken care of on both sides, for the black community to deal with it as a whole, but also for us to see change, right? For us to see the society as a whole change as well. It's a two-part system, and both sides have a role to play.
Wow. There's so much. And when I listen to professionals like yourself, unpack just these little pockets, like
Right.
you didn't even touch the whole gambit of what is the black plight. You're just touching on little pockets, and it's just like, it's so jam-packed with all of these things that, to me, make it glaringly obvious that counseling and therapy should be funded by the country for black people. Like,
Man, there should be, I almost feel like there's a lot of things at this point that should be funded,
it's
right?
just part of reparations, like free counseling, man.
It's one of those things we truly need as a community, but it's one of those things of, and that's where I come in of, for me, it's using my gifts. And for me, I love working with black men, but even more specifically, we do have to attack the aspect of working with our young black boys.
Yes.
Because that's going to be the kicker. If we can start to change that narrative for them, the narrative of, you can be anything, you can do anything. Do not let anyone tell you what you are, who you are, what you can do.
That's so
if
good.
We can start to change those narratives for them, right? Then they can look at it different. Narratives are huge for all of us. For every person in the world, everyone has a narrative. So the way I like to describe a narrative is just like sunglasses, like the sunglasses you have on, right? If you're walking around all day with sunglasses on and you take them off, it's a completely different picture for you. The same thing for narratives. It's the lens that you view the world through. So if your narrative is, regardless of whatever I do, I'm always going to be looked at as this or this person in society, well, quite frankly, that can kind of shift some of the decisions that you start to make. And that's one of the things that I love to try to dive in with young black men with, is that aspect of, just because this is what society has told you your narrative is, that does not have to be, and that does not have to be what defines you. But if that's what you've been told, if that's what every person in your family has been told before you, well, it's a little bit easier to start to believe that lie, unfortunately.
That's
that's why I love where the community comes in of saying there has to be some mental health aspects of it to bring people in and to really uplift our community in that way. So, but it also comes in regards to educating our community in some of the ways that we have been, because, Black history, right? We get 28 days a year if it's not a leap year. Right. And even in that regard, right? Even in that regard, let's be honest with ourselves. America doesn't really enjoy expressing the hurts of what they've caused for people in the past. That's just not what America enjoys doing.
Right.
So it's almost indicative of us as a community. We have to do those things. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves on what some of those pains have looked like, because sometimes it can be very hurtful to go through that.
Yeah.
But, one thing to think about it is the stress that we deal with as Black people. It is intense. It is
Sure.
quite intense. In the world, everyone deals with stress, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as a person of color, it looks different.
Mm-hmm.
And the PTSD that goes along with that, the study that I talked to you about, the 2010 report that showed that African Americans are much more likely and experience PTSD more than any other race. Prolonged toxic stress can create a lot of different things for people, especially if we talk about it in childhood. You know, when you talk about adverse childhood experiences,
Mm-hmm.
that starts to disrupt things quickly. And we know through science, this isn't just my opinion.
Sure.
This is science, and you can go back and look at this. It disrupts neurological development, which changes the way we take tests, which changes our attention span in school, which changes some behavioral issues that we might have. So let's go with just those three, right? Let's
Yeah.
just say those three. Test taking, behavioral issues, the ability to pay attention for longer periods of time. If you lack those three things, how well are you going to do at school?
Not very well.
Right? And so, and let's extrapolate it out even more so. If I have a teacher that's geared maybe not towards Black people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Off the bat, that's even more of a problem.
Right.
Right? Now, even let's just say it in a perfect world that teacher is the best teacher you're going to meet. They're willing to drive it home, right? They're going to do some great things for you. Well, with that being said, they're still dealing with that. They're still going to be able to have some of those they're going to have some of those drawbacks that child is going to have.
Right.
So how do we educate that child? Well, if you don't have a mental health background and saying, well, this is what this child has been dealing with, this is what their mom and dad dealt with, this is what their grandparents dealt with, I need to have we need to have some different resources for this child versus saying, this is a bad kid.
Right.
And we need to either expel them, we need to put them into a quote unquote, right? They're a slow learner, quote unquote, which is what a lot of our parents' generations dealt with. Things of that nature. When you don't even appreciate the culture of what people have been dealing with for years,
Yeah.
it can be difficult for you to even understand that. And then we keep moving forward because I just stopped on the neurological development. I didn't even keep going. Socially, emotionally, cognitive, it impairs you. So now we've reached all the way to the brain function. Now we're going to keep going. The adoption of health risk behaviors.
Yeah.
That's where we go. When we don't take care of this trauma that we've dealt with, we start to make some health risks, and we call them health risk behaviors. But what it is the smoking, drinking, right? Unhealthy habits that start to become, because they're coping mechanisms.
Wow.
Right? Like we're dealing with pain. We're dealing with we're dealing with trauma. We're dealing with PTSD that's never been resolved. How do we deal with that? Right? So then we start to go into that realm. Some risky behaviors as well as some sexual things as well. That quickly can lead into disease, disability, social problems as well in that regard. And we've already touched in, which also lead to early death. So that's unfortunately the cycle that we're seeing. And that cycle has played out so many times within the Black community and for so many Black people. Because if it doesn't get addressed, if that trauma does not get addressed, then it just keeps spiraling and it keeps going downward. So that's where I want to come in, and that's why I'm thankful. It's unfortunate this season that we're in, but at the same time, I think that this is a beautiful opportunity because we're given an opportunity to dive in right now and to really have a goal of what are our next steps and what ways can we impact our community in a positive way moving forward.
Absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. And so, and one thing, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, is the aspect of, 15%. So Black students make up about 15% of enrollment. Okay. So, but at the same time, Black students, we make up about 30 to 40% of students that are suspended or expelled. And the study has shown that those don't necessarily have to do with worse behavior. Part of it is dealing with the aspect of, if we don't have a lot of teachers that look like us or have dealt with some of the things that we've dealt with, or professors who've dealt with some of the things that we've dealt with, or employers who've dealt with some of the things that we've dealt with, it can be very difficult for them to even understand or to be able to take that moment and be empathetic and say, like, I get where you're coming from. It looks much different than what
Yeah.
I've ever experienced, right?
Yeah.
I'll give the example of, I've said to someone that, someone asked me, and it was during this season, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, it was a white friend who sent me something and was like, have you ever dealt with any kind of police, harassment? And it was this moment for me of sending back to them. I was kind of silly. I don't know any black man who hasn't.
Right.
I don't. No one in my circle of friends and my family, I don't know any black man who hasn't. I've been pulled over and asked if I
Wow.
stole my own car. My car's in my name.
Wow.
So, think about things like that people just won't know. And if I say that to a white friend, some of them don't. They're right. Like,
Yeah.
there are some people who may not believe that. My
Hmm.
friends would believe that because why would I lie to them? But
Right.
some people will totally write that off and say, no, you're lying. That would never happen. Right. And that's just that's a drop in the bucket for what most black people deal with. So
Jeez.
it's deep. It keeps going deeper. And so that's why I say mental health and getting into a counselor, and not just getting into a counselor, but a
Hmm.
counselor that understands your specific needs is
Yes.
powerful.
It
Very
can even
powerful.
be more damaging to put yourself in a situation where you're trying to be counseled by someone who has no clue, no
Wow.
concept for the Black
Right.
experience, right? Like,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even more so, I look at it the aspect of wanting to understand. Because I think we
yeah.
all have, and I almost look at it as, comrades. We say that, like my white comrades, right? The ones that
Hmm.
are genuinely like, yo, I'll shut up and listen, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just trying to be there for you. Like, let me know, like, educate me on the plight or whatever that you're dealing with, versus someone that's very skeptical
Hmm.
of basically everything race related. So
Yeah.
you're gonna deal with that as well. But I would love to talk about some of the tools too that black men
Yes.
can be using
Absolutely.
to your advantage,
Hmm.
because some of those tools are, I call it, it's almost like, we all have to use acronyms for everything, but it's called PIMS. So I call it PIMS, and the reason why I call it PIMS is because we have to become very accepted with becoming very active throughout our days. And when I say being active, I mean in every way, and that's where the PIMS comes in, is physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Mm.
In all of those four ways, we need to be active, and we need to be constantly active because of that specific reason. Science tells us if we're constantly physically active, if we're getting enough sleep, if we're eating right and taking care of ourselves, our
Hmm.
chances of experiencing mental health problems drastically decrease. Drastically
Mm.
decrease. So part of it is making sure you are being physically active, whatever that looks like for you. And once again, I love saying things like this because it dispels myths. People act like black people don't go out and hike, right?
Hmm.
Like, or you can't go get with nature, or you can't go ride a bike, or you can't go do yoga.
Hmm.
Please go do those things. Go swimming. Go do some things to go be active and
Hmm.
get your blood moving and get some of those things. Because regardless, the two things it's going to do, physically, it makes you feel better. And then absolutely, it's going to release some of the stress that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Can I just
So those,
interject and say, like,
yeah,
don't lose your thought? I'm just
no, keep
the
going.
insanity of it to me when I think about what you just said in Black people don't go hiking. Black people don't go swimming.
Right,
Perhaps the reason why we're not known to do those things is because slavery, because segregation. You know what I mean?
right,
Because racism in general. Like, if we have not historically been allowed, literally
right.
allowed in certain spaces, or just the thought of being in nature for us, for just a lot of people, could be traumatic. You think about these people that are popping up hanging from trees right now.
Yes,
You
and
know,
I
like,
definitely want to dive into that. That what you
let's
just,
do
because
it.
I've got that on there too. Yes, because that goes into the hypervigilancy as well. What we know is, and let's be honest, like, this is between with you and I speaking here. Black men, as a whole, don't commit suicide by hanging themselves on trees. That went, show me in the history, right, of our being when that was taking place.
Right.
But yet, But yet, if you, even the one in Houston, the first thing that they reported was a suicide by hanging before any information had been put out. Which to me, and I think most black people, it was a red flag from the first one you saw. Right now, there's already been over 3 over the past, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what hypervigilancy looks like too, because that's constantly playing in a lot of people's minds. I know it is on mine.
Mm-hmm.
The aspect of making sure you're safe, making sure, and I think me and my friends, and me and my close friends who were black, and me and my family who were black, of course, the black men in my family, of course, we text back and forth and say things like, man, be safe, this and that. But it looks different for us. It looks different when it's a constant.
Yeah.
That's the kicker, is when it's constant stress, when it's constantly on your mind of, I have to be safe. I have to watch this. I have to look out this way. That is very unique. I keep coming back to that aspect of, it is very unique for the black culture compared to other cultures. They don't always have to look at life like that. And I feel like for black people, that is, for us, and in some ways, and you touched in on it, it's ingrained, right? Like, we've dealt with it for so long that it starts to become ingrained with you, unfortunately. And I love touching in on it, of the other aspect of saying, part of the hiking or the swimming or some of just the ridiculous stereotypes that we deal with as black people, part of that is people not wanting us to do those things too.
That's what I'm saying.
Right? Like, you got to understand that too. Like, people, and I say that of working with young black boys and working with young black men, of like, once again, don't let someone else's narrative of you take away from what you're going to do or what you feel comfortable doing. Right? Or it's some of those things that really have been super detrimental, not just to me, but to people in general, but to black men in general, of educating ourselves, consistently educating ourselves, what it looks like, right, to be educated and to move forward in some of those ways, and to recognize necessarily society has not always wanted black people to be educated in some of those ways. So it is deep. For us, right? And there are so many layers to it. And I think part of it is pulling back some of those layers, but you do have to find someone who's willing, right, to go down that rabbit hole with you. Because to your point, you can definitely have someone lead you in some pretty negative ways if they're not educated on the experience that we face specifically as black people.
Right. Wow. So I know as a counselor, you probably have bumped up against just this myth and this narrative, and I see it all the time, just in my family members, friends, what have you. And maybe as a black man who is also a counselor, you can kind of operate in a little bit of a dichotomy and say, on one hand, you understand why the struggle for black men to make the choice to willingly invest in therapy and counseling and mental health is a struggle. And then on the flip side, speak to how imperative it is. Like, can you split yourself in half and do that? Yeah.
Absolutely, because I was there.
Right. Okay.
Right?
So talk to us about that.
Right. So let's go there. So as a black man, and I think it even touches to the aspect of when I was touching in on the point of, so as a black community, we do have some work to do, that we could be educating ourselves and changing the narrative on our end. But let me ask you this. If I do all that work, right? And I do all that work and I'm changing the way I go about looking at life and going about the structure, but I look at the system, and the system has not changed. The system remains the same. That can be a tough dichotomy for black people, especially for black men, because think about that. If I'm going to, you say to yourself, I want tangible results.
Sure.
I don't care who you are. You want to see the results, right? So if I'm going to do all this work and I'm going to make these changes, but the system that I walk out into is still going to shoot me if I'm unarmed and running away from them.
Jesus.
Well, right? Do you see what I'm saying? So that still plays its role into that. So for me, I like to kind of pull it back a little bit and say, okay, one, we're going to shoot for some tangible results, right?
Mm-hmm.
So counseling specifically centered to the needs of Black people in general, right?
Yeah.
So for that specific one, and the other part is, so i.e., let's push it through of saying understanding not only overt racism and exclusion that Black people face, but also depending on what they grew up with,
Yeah.
which could have been going on since their youth, basically that kind of discrepancy. So one, finding the right counselor that can bring tangible things to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tangible tools of, hey, utilizing this specific tool can help you in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't always have to be of, hey, I've been in that situation, but I won't lie and say it doesn't help, right? Like that it
Right.
does help to have someone that's been in that situation, and there doesn't have to be that moment of, well, does this person believe what I'm saying, or
Yeah.
has this person ever been here in that moment? So I do think that that's important for Black men to be able to recognize too. Is there are Black therapists out there who have and do deal with what they deal with on a daily basis.
Mm.
There's also the aspect of the myth around counseling is, there's so many things of understanding that go on, and I touched on the microaggressions as well,
Yeah.
of recognizing cultural microaggressions that Black men face specifically,
Sure.
right? Of, this is how you have to look, this is how you have to dress, this is how you have to talk, these are the sports that you can play,
Mm-hmm.
these are the women that you can talk to,
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature that can start to roll and start to create this thought process in a lot of men that they're not able to break through. And that's when
Mm.
it becomes, to me, that's when it becomes quote unquote stereotypical of, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go along with the motions of what society has told me of what a Black man quote unquote looks like.
Right.
That's dangerous,
Yeah.
right? That's very dangerous versus looking at it and saying, this is who I am. This is who God made me.
Mm-hmm.
This is who I want to be. I may not be there right now, but these are some of the tools and steps that I can be taking moving forward to get to that place.
Yeah.
That's what I preach, and that's what I teach more, is trying to remove that narrative of don't walk in thinking that you have to do it some sort of way. No, 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 no. Black people more than any group are told this is the box that you have to fit in.
True.
Make it work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Versus saying, no, 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 no. We're capable of anything and just as much as anyone else. Let's go from there. Let's go
Right.
from that place. Let's go from that place of power and move from there versus any other kind of way. That's more for me what I've seen has worked
Mm-hmm.
in some powerful ways, and I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
Honestly,
Wow. Well, I mean, it sounds. I know that in our generation and moving forward, even those before us, maybe the generation before us, like that stigma, I think is very slowly starting to be broken off. Where we're
right,
starting to see some public figures that are being open about just the concept of mental health and
right,
therapy and how it's helpful and how it's important. Um, and I mean, I don't know. I think it's really just got to be a continued commitment to ourselves as
hmm,
individuals and ourselves as a people, to encourage
absolutely,
one another towards healthy, towards
yes,
regaining our dignity. Like all of these things are part of our sanctification process. You know what I'm saying? All of these
yes,
things are part of how we live out our best selves in this world where oppression and racism and white supremacy are all very real elements that we have to deal with on an everyday basis. And I'm so glad that you touched on, since we're focused on men this week, like our boys. That's why I've opened up space for some of the young guys in my life just to have a voice,
hmm,
and like they do share some of what they see and what they're experiencing.
right,
Man, and so it's good to know who you are and to know some of the services that you offer, and the fact that you cater to the younger guys too, the younger people too. It's not just
absolutely,
adults and married folks and grown folks and all of that. You know what I mean?
right,
That you can kind of walk the wide gambit. I don't know. I think that it's just, there's a special place for guys like you in the work that needs to be done right now. So, man, Adrian, I appreciate you, you know, and I know that there are so many other people out there that appreciate the work that you are doing and the work that you're getting ready to do as soon as you get this intern.
Hey, no, it's already happening.
You
It's
already
gonna
doing
keep
it, huh?
happening, right? Already doing it, gonna keep doing it, right? And gonna keep doing it even more. And I think more
Yeah.
than anything, it's just encouraged. I think you hit the nail on the head, what you just spoke into of that aspect of, you know what, it is about making our needs a priority.
Yes.
And if you've never been told that your needs are important, you've never been shown that,
Yeah.
then there's a chance that you can lose track of that. You
Yeah.
can lose track of how valuable you are and how
Mm-hmm.
important that you are. And I think, unfortunately, that is something that Black people deal with specifically because that's what we've been shown.
Yeah.
It's not just one of those, and I think people say that sometimes, that it's just, oh, that's just a narrative y'all create, right? Like, as black
Mm.
people are creating, versus looking at it and saying, you know, not only possibly, yes, that it can be our narrative, but it's been played out, right? Like, we've witnessed it played out even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
It continues to get played out of saying your lives are actually less valuable than everyone else's. So in that regard, that's why I like to flip it on its head and say, no, that's not even close to being the case. And as a matter of fact, our needs are important
Yeah.
and your needs are a priority. And when we start to make that a priority, when we start to make our needs a priority and we
Mm-hmm.
take back that type of power,
Mm-hmm.
then you see people's lives start to change immediately. You start to
Absolutely.
see the growth right there. So that's where I come from. When I have people sit down with me in counseling, it's very quickly of, especially for Black men, because it looks different.
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to that. The Black men that I work with, the struggles that they work with, it's not always just wife, kids, right? It's not just that. It looks different because it's under a different perspective as well when you're dealing with, like I said, when you're taking alternate routes to get to work because you're trying to avoid
Yeah.
police officers, when you're, you know, dealing with microaggressions, when someone says, hey, you know, why don't you wear your hair like this because it looks better when
Right.
it's excuse me, right? Like there are things that Black people just genuinely deal with on a day-to-day basis
Mm-hmm.
that cause that consistent stress to be dealt with. And that's why I say it's
Mm.
so important and it's so valuable for us to take charge of that and to address it. Because I think, and I don't want to be too negative when I say this, but I think our society has shown us, if we don't do it, like if we
Nobody's,
don't take, thank you,
bro, like I have adopted this saying of, you know, we're all we got.
right,
Because if we don't see us, ain't nobody else gonna see us.
absolutely,
Now maybe if we see us and start to collectively value one another, then maybe perhaps other people will be like, oh, Black lives do matter. Y'all actually are
right,
y'all
right,
actually are, you know, worth something and kind of dope. But regardless of if they do or not, we have to, you know, in my opinion, take it up on ourselves to love on each other, to love on
right,
ourselves. You know what I mean? And I
yes,
think that's kind of been an
absolutely.
unspoken reality since we got here. You know what I mean?
And that it wasn't once we got here. That's a whole nother discussion. I would love to go there with you of what of what
Mm.
what it looks like to support Black people as one Black person to another, what it looks like and why it's a struggle at times for us to support one another. And some of that stuff, and when I go all the way back and I dive into of what the chattel slave structure looked like here in America, what the breaking of the family structure for Black people looked like here, when you go back to that place, then it doesn't look so irrational to me,
Yeah,
right? Then
yeah.
it doesn't look so irrational that you had men just being bred, right? And
Right.
stripped away, constantly stripped away, stripped away, stripped away from a family structure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you see those things, and you see Black women have had some of the most atrocities dealt to them in this world has ever known.
Facts.
So there are some of those things that, once again, are very unique to the Black culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things of, we do have to support ourselves in a different way. And we do
Mm-hmm.
have to come around ourselves in a different way. And it does start in some of those ways. But this is a powerful time right now, and as many black men as I can help, and as many, and myself included,
Mm-hmm.
being spiritually strong. There's
Yeah.
also another part about it.
Yeah.
I happen to be a follower of Christ. I can't speak for everyone who's watching this, but
Sure.
what I will tell you is this: if you are in a good place with your God, if you are in a good spiritual walk,
Mm-hmm.
that also plays a role. So, and that's just not me saying that. Once
Sure.
again, science will show you that.
Mm-hmm.
Those things play a role in that, and having something to be grounded in.
Wow.
Those are powerful things, and those are the things I specifically work with men with. Work with every client that I work, or excuse me, every person that I work with. I work with them on those things, but I see it even more so for black men. Of
Mm.
we have to have that moment of there is some pumping up that has to go on of saying like, no, 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 you got this.
Yeah.
I don't care what you heard. I don't care what so and so said. You got this.
Yeah.
Okay? And
Yeah.
this is how we're going to go about it. And
Wow.
being very matter of fact about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it does look different for black men, but it's not insurmountable.
Sure.
Like I have 100% faith
Mm-hmm.
that that this is going to happen and it's going to look better for us moving forward. But it does start with us kind of taking the bull by the horns and saying, hey, I am enough. I am good enough. My needs are important. I
Mm-hmm.
am important, and I want to
Mm-hmm.
dive into my needs, and I want to see some personal growth for myself because I want that for me. I
Yeah.
want that for my family. I want that for my community. But once again, when you've been told over and over and over, it can be difficult, right?
Yeah.
So that's where I come from on the counseling side of saying, you know what? I know what outside of these walls, I know what you deal with.
Yeah.
But when you're standing in here with me, I'm gonna get you ready for it. Okay?
Wow. Bro, that
Yeah.
is so dope. Like I got goosebumps just thinking about how amazing and liberating that would feel to be in a place where someone is looking you in the face and centering you and saying, I am you. I understand exactly what you're going through. Here are some tools that I have to help you keep on keeping on.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
In a way where you can develop and blossom and lay
Absolutely.
down bondage that was handed to you, you know, and
Yes.
pick up freedom. You know what I mean? Like
Absolutely.
that's amazing to me, and I'm excited just about the work that God has for you to do because it's a big work, bro. You know, we
Hey,
need you out here in these streets, fam. Like seriously,
right.
seriously.
I'm ready for it. And you
Yeah,
said
man.
something powerful earlier. You said living into the best version of yourself. I say that a lot
Mm,
during every day of the best version of yourself. Because if you can hit the best version of you,
mm-hmm.
man, it's tough. Nobody can stop you at that point.
Yeah.
Even the negative things people say about you no
Right.
longer have much power on you. Even the
Facts.
positive things people say about you, you don't dive into either way because you
Mm-hmm.
know who you are.
Yeah.
You know where you're going. You're focused on that. You don't
Yeah.
need the external motivation. You don't need the, you know what I'm saying? You don't
That's
need
so
someone to
good.
pump you up, pat you on the back, or you don't care if they're trying to tear you down because you know who you are and you know where you're
Wow.
going. So that's where I come from on that of really trying to enforce that
Mm-hmm.
and really let people know that's the truth.
Yeah.
Once again, I know you've been told a lot of lies, but I'm trying to tell you the truth right now,
Yeah.
right? And that's what you are, and that's what God has made us. I mean, we've made it this far with very
Absolutely.
minimal help. So
Absolutely.
I feel like once we come together and once we do have like people really pouring into one another,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, there's no stopping us. So,
That's so good, man. Well, Adrian, we got to wrap up, but I just
I
want to
know, I
say
know.
thank you so much for all of the insight and just the knowledge and wisdom and encouragement that you dropped in this time. Before we leave, you know, Juneteenth is coming up and we're encouraging everyone to buy black. Can you tell people how they can get in contact with you if they have a loved one, you know, a black male or just a person in general that could use your services?
Absolutely, absolutely. They can reach me, A Jones, that's AJONES at wefixbrains.com. Our direct line is 214-556-0996. They can also reach me at Adrian Jones Counseling on Instagram. They can reach me on my Facebook page, which is Adrian L. Jones Counseling. So you can find me on pretty much every social media platform, as well as, and I am currently taking new clients as well. I am seeing new cases. A small bit of a wait, right? Like it's not too bad, not too bad of a wait, but I will get you in. So let me know, and this is what God put me on this earth to do. So I'm thankful for it, and I love to do it. So
Awesome.
whatever I can do, and in any kind of way I can help people and to serve, that's what I love to do.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Adrian, thank you again so much for the time, and thank you guys for watching.